Hi, this is Michael Carnes for Exponential Audio, and today I thought I'd give you a little tutorial on making small rooms with Exponential Audio Reverbs. Now, everything I show you today will apply to all Exponential Audio Reverbs, whether stereo or surround. There are a few tricks that come with the more advanced reverbs, but I'm just going to stay with Phoenix Verb, so every trick that you learn here will apply. Now, a little of what you learn might work with some other reverbs, so I'd encourage you to try that, but they'll all work with the exponential audio, so maybe that's the direction that you want to head. Now, let me show you what material we're going to be working with. It's a basic R&B drum track. It's got some low frequencies, some high frequencies, and a lot of impulses, so we can hear what's going on with that. We're also going to hear it fully wet, which is not normally the way that you'd mix these things in. It will be some combination of wet and dry, but I want you to focus on the effect of the parameter changes now, so we'll hear it all the way wet. So why don't I just bring this up with the settings I have now. So you can see that I already have something of a small room. Now let's take a look at some of the parameters real quickly. I'll have the reverb level all the way down, the early level all the way up. So all we're focusing on is these reflections here, the early reflection section. So the first thing I'll play with is the time. This is a parameter that stretches the amount of time for the early reflections, and we'll just listen to the effect. So you can hear, as the time increases, that we begin to hear the discrete reflections from the source material, and there is a certain point that that really doesn't sound natural any longer because we are hearing discrete reflections. So let me show you about this second parameter. Let's take it back out to here where maybe it was a little problematic. Early attack. This changes whether the energy is more in the first reflections, as it is here, or in the last reflections, as it is here. So let's bring it over this, well, let's start in the middle. Let's hear what happens when I take this and move it. So you could hear when the early attack was set on a low value, that room began to sound more natural. It was still large, and you could still hear the individual reflections on the transients, but it was more natural. It was more like what happens in a real place. But when the parameters were like this, it was beginning to give a special effect, which we always call the inverse or reverse effect. So that's one of the ways that you get there. It's useful all by itself, but it's hardly convincing as a room. There's one last parameter to focus on, and it's more subtle, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with it. It's the early slope. This is a low-pass filter that affects the later reflections and doesn't affect the earlier ones at all. It's something like air absorption. You're really only going to hear it when you've got a lot of real strong high frequency information, and it will basically dull those later reflections. So there's enough of that. So this is all the obvious stuff, and this may be all that you thought you had, but we're just getting started. Now you notice I've left it here, sort of in the middle. This was one of those places where it wasn't real natural. So now let's go over and let's take a look at diffusion. Now diffusion affects everything that goes into the reverb, and you can essentially think of it as making your walls crinkly so that they, instead of reflecting direct discrete reflections, they begin to break up that signal into smaller and smaller chunks so that you don't hear the discrete stuff, but you hear more of the sense of a reflective room. So the first thing I'll do is just play with bringing the value up and down. So you can see that what was discrete pops is sort of spread out more. The room is more reflective. It's the same size, but the walls changed from being carpet to maybe being wood or something like that. So that's the amount of diffusion. The next thing is the size of the diffused objects. In this example, they were very small. What happens if I change the size? Now this is very dependent on a lot of things, but basically you'll see that when the diffuser size was small, you could still hear something along the lines of discrete reflections. As I opened it up, increased this size, that became less and less obvious. So now we've got our three early parameters here and our diffusion parameters. There's another place we can go, which is the reverb type. Now, for the purposes of what we've been covering so far, the reverb type affects the nature of the diffusers. It does more, but for right now it's just affecting the diffusers. Hall is the type that has the least complex diffusers, so you're going to hear still more discrete stuff through there. But it increases as I go to chamber and increases again as I go to plate. So by the time we get into plate or chamber, we're hearing something that really sounds more and more convincing as a room that we might want to have music in. And I will go back to the early parameters and show you again the effect. Let's take it away. And of course we can add final polish by playing with our output EQ. So you can already see that there's a lot more we can do than meets the eye. We have our basic reflection shaping here, and we have our reflective feature size control here, and exactly how dense all those reflections are in our reverb type. So we already have a lot more parameters than may have been obvious. But believe it or not, we're still just getting started. I'm now going to turn down the early level completely and bring up reverb level and show you the great hidden secret of all of this. Right now, these parameters won't do anything that you can hear. This one will. turns out that the reverb engine is also a set of reflections. They're different reflections, and they can be controlled by changing reverb size. So you already have another way of playing around with reflections. That's also affected by the diffuser parameters and by the reverb type, because the reverb type now not only affects the diffusers, but it actually affects that reverb engine and changes the pattern of reflections that we get in there. So I'm just going to play our drums for a little bit and play around with these things. Now you've probably noticed a little thing I've been avoiding here, which is this linked diffuser size. Now what happens is the diffuser size is linked to the reverb size. In a pretty natural way. So now you've got this whole other reflection engine, but there's even more going on. You may have noticed that this little section looks an awful lot like this section, and they are similar. Let's listen to how this room changes. So we're changing the way this energy moves into this secret early reflection section. And of course that's controlled and affected by our output filters as well, and by our reverb type. So can you use them together? Of course you can. You now have an even more complex engine. That you can do a lot of neat things with. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we would like a situation where we're in a large studio, but our mics are in fairly close. So what we want is our early reflections will have something of a quick chirp on them, because imagine we're in close, so we're going to get a real cluster of early reflections that come in. That. But because it's in a large room, we're also interested in getting some sense of that room. It's much quieter than the microphones because they're in close to the drums. But let's play with this room a little bit. Now you'll hear as I bring the walls of the room in on top of the early reflections from the microphones. So there's the room by itself. Those are those room mics that you hung way in the back. Here are the mics on the instrument. And now you've got the whole thing. You can play around with the size of that room. So that's basically how you can really make small rooms with Phoenix Verb. You have your early stuff, which is obvious. You already figured that out. You have diffusion that you can manage in several ways, by the diffusion parameters, by the reverb type. You've also got the reverb size that you can play with. And now all these other reverb attack parameters play into the equation. And on the end, there's one last thing you can do. A little bit of reverb time won't still take you out of the sense of a small room. So there, we got ourselves a nice little drum room out of that. And you can only imagine how many different kinds of small rooms that you can make with this. All you have to do is use your ears, use your source material, give yourself a little time to play with it. Thank you very much for watching.